The air inside the luxurious ballroom sparkled with champagne glasses, crystal chandeliers, and the chatter of Los Angeles high society. A string quartet played softly in the corner, while waiters glided around with trays of caviar. Every guest's attention, however, was fixed on the grand staircase, waiting for the groom and his dazzling bride to make their entrance. Michael Reed, a self-made millionaire in his early 30s, stood proudly at the top of the stairs. By his side was Chloe Summers, the young model he had chosen as his new wife. Her silver gown shimmered under the lights, and her smug smile carried the confidence of someone who believed she had won. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered, and envy floated through the crowd like perfume. But beneath the glamour, whispers of scandal already swirled. Just 6 months ago, Michael had been married to another woman, Emily Carter. She wasn't a model or a celebrity. She was a nurse, a gentle, devoted wife who had stood by him through years of struggle, back when his name meant nothing. And now, abandoned and carrying his child, Emily was nowhere to be seen. Or so they thought. As the newlyweds greeted their guests, an unusual hush swept across the ballroom. Heads turned toward the massive glass doors at the entrance. Outside, the sound of tires screeched to a stop. Guests pressed closer, murmuring. A sleek black limousine, long and intimidating, had just pulled up. Its glossy surface reflected the golden lights of the mansion, commanding attention. The driver stepped out and rushed to open the door. A tall figure emerged first, a man in an impeccable suit, his presence radiating quiet power. Then another. And another. 3 men in total, each with an aura that silenced the room. They were not celebrities, but everyone seemed to know who they were. Jonathan Carter, the ruthless financial tycoon. Daniel Carter, the world-renowned architect. Matthew Carter, the genius tech investor. Billionaires, brothers, legends of New York. And then, finally, she appeared. Emily Carter. Dressed in a flowing black gown that draped perfectly over her baby bump, she carried herself with the grace of a queen and the quiet strength of a mother. Her face glowed, not from makeup, but from dignity reclaimed. The crowd gasped as they realized. She wasn't a forgotten wife, a weak, abandoned woman. She was the sister of 3 of the most powerful men in America. Michael's smile froze. Chloe's confident expression twisted into disbelief. The room, seconds ago buzzing with music and laughter, now hung heavy in stunned silence. Every camera turned, every eye followed. Emily stood at the doorway, shielded by her brothers, her eyes fixed firmly on the man who betrayed her. And with one step forward, Emily shattered the illusion of Michael's perfect new life, leaving everyone to wonder what would happen next. Before the limousine, before the shock of the wedding, there was Emily Carter, the woman no one thought twice about. Emily wasn't born into glamour. She grew up in a modest suburb outside New York City, raised by parents who taught her that love was more important than money. Unlike her 3 powerful older brothers, who conquered the worlds of finance, architecture, and technology, Emily chose a quieter path. She became a nurse. She spent her days caring for strangers, holding the hands of the sick, and staying up through long night shifts. To her, dignity wasn't measured in dollars, but in kindness. Years ago, when Michael Reed was just a struggling entrepreneur with a string of failed businesses, Emily was the one who believed in him. She met him at a charity clinic where he came in with a broken wrist after working construction jobs to stay afloat. He had no health insurance, no real plan, but he had ambition in his eyes. Where others saw risk, Emily saw potential. She stood by him, encouraged him, and even worked double shifts to help him pay off debts. When he finally found success, Emily thought their sacrifices were worth it. She remembered the nights they shared instant noodles in a tiny apartment, promising each other that once life got better, they'd never forget these struggles. She believed those vows. But success changes people. Michael began dressing sharper, dining with investors, and networking at parties Emily wasn't invited to. Slowly, the man who once cherished her started seeing her as a weight that held him back. The final blow came when Emily discovered she was pregnant. Instead of joy, Michael's reaction was cold. He accused her of trying to trap him with a child. And soon after, he left, walking straight into the arms of Chloe Summers, a rising model who offered beauty, status, and access to the social elite. For months, Emily suffered in silence. She hid her pain from the public eye. Even her brothers didn't know at first. because she didn't want to be a burden. She carried her child alone, working at the hospital by day and crying herself to sleep at night. Her health weakened, and yet she held on, determined that her baby would be born into love, even if the father had abandoned them. But silence has its limits. When Emily accidentally saw the wedding announcement splashed across a magazine, Michael marrying Chloe in Los Angeles, something inside her broke. Not because she wanted him back, but because her dignity had been dragged through the mud. The man she had saved, the man she had loved, was parading his betrayal in front of the world. That was when she made a choice. She called her brothers. For years she had kept her life quiet, separate from their empire, but now she needed them. Not to fight for her, but to stand with her. And as her brothers answered that call, Emily's journey transformed from silent suffering into a storm the world would never forget. Los Angeles was famous for its bright lights and red carpets, but tonight's wedding was meant to outshine even Hollywood itself. The Reed Summers Union had been hyped for weeks by celebrity magazines, luxury blogs, and society columns. Guests whispered that no expense had been spared, that Michael Reed had poured millions into making the night unforgettable. The ceremony was set at a palatial mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The estate, perched high on a cliff, gleamed with marble terraces and golden railings. Imported roses lined the driveway, releasing a sweet fragrance that floated in the evening air. Strings of fairy lights wound around towering palm trees, illuminating the path for the city's elite. From the entrance alone, guests could tell this wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration of wealth, a showcase of Michael's rise into the upper class. Inside, the ballroom was drenched in extravagance. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars sparkled from the ceiling, scattering light across marble floors polished to perfection. The tables were draped in silk, set with gold-rimmed plates, and decorated with centerpieces of rare orchids flown in from Thailand. A live orchestra tuned their instruments, preparing to play classics that would blend seamlessly with the popping of champagne bottles. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of oysters and caviar as though they were treasures. Everywhere you looked, power gathered. Hollywood actors, CEOs, fashion moguls, politicians, every name that mattered seemed to be there. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns filled the room with chatter about money, influence, and deals made behind closed doors. And at the center of it all stood Michael Reed, basking in his new identity as a man who had finally made it. By his side, Chloe Summers posed for photographers with the practiced grace of a starlet. Her diamond necklace sparkled under the lights, nearly blinding onlookers. She leaned into Michael's arm, her smile wide, her confidence absolute. To the guests, she wasn't just a bride. She was proof that Michael had ascended to a higher league. Together, they were the golden couple, untouchable, enviable, admired. But beneath the glamour, tension stirred. Not everyone approved. A few older guests whispered about Emily Carter, the wife who had vanished. Some shook their heads, muttering about loyalty, about betrayal. Others dismissed it with a shrug, arguing that this was how the rich lived, trading partners like fashion trends. Michael ignored it all, choosing instead to raise his glass and toast to his own success. Outside, the Pacific waves crashed against the cliff below, as though nature itself protested the union. The mansion's grand doors remained guarded, ready to welcome more late arrivals. Guests leaned toward the entrance every time they heard footsteps, wondering who else of importance would show up. The atmosphere grew heavier with expectation, like the pause before thunder strikes. And then, just as the orchestra began its opening melody and Michael prepared to make his grand entrance with Chloe, the sound of tires screeched against the gravel driveway outside the gates. The music faltered, conversations froze, and every guest turned their head toward the sound that would soon shatter the perfect illusion of this night. Michael Reed looked every inch the success story. Dressed in a custom black tuxedo, his posture was straight, his chin lifted as though he had conquered the world. To the crowd gathered in the ballroom, he wasn't just another man. He was the image of achievement, the boy from nothing who had risen to stand among kings. But behind the confident smile and polished shoes was a man consumed by vanity. Michael had always wanted more. More money, more recognition, more validation. And when Emily Carter, his wife of 5 years, became pregnant, instead of gratitude, he felt shackled. In his mind, children meant responsibility. Responsibility meant slowing down, and slowing down meant losing his place in the glittering world he had just stepped into. Enter Chloe Summers. She was 24, radiant and ruthless. Chloe wasn't naive about her place in the world. She knew her beauty opened doors, and she had no shame in walking through them. When she met Michael at a fashion gala, she saw not just a man, but an opportunity. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm when she spoke, and whispered promises of a glamorous life he could never have with Emily. Michael, hungry for validation and dazzled by Chloe's spotlight, fell for it completely. To Chloe, Emily was an afterthought. She often mocked her in private, calling her the plain nurse, sneering at the idea that Michael had once lived in a small apartment with such a woman. In Chloe's eyes, Emily's quiet strength and sacrifice were weaknesses. What mattered was appearances, and tonight's wedding was her crowning moment. Michael believed Chloe made him look powerful. Beside her, he felt younger, richer, stronger. But the truth was, Chloe's affection was as shallow as the champagne glasses that clinked around them. She wasn't marrying Michael for love. She was marrying him for status, for the headlines, for the diamonds around her neck. As they mingled through the ballroom, Michael introduced Chloe to investors and celebrities as though she were a prize he had won. She smiled sweetly for the cameras, then whispered biting comments about guests who didn't measure up. Every gesture was calculated, every laugh rehearsed. Together, they looked perfect, but only on the surface. Still, Michael ignored the unease in the room. He dismissed the whispers about Emily as jealousy. In his mind, Emily was part of the past, tucked away like an old photograph. He didn't believe she had the courage to show her face again. And if she did, what power could she possibly hold against him now? What Michael didn't know was that Emily had never been powerless. She had chosen to live quietly, apart from her brother's empire, but her bloodline was one of the most respected in the nation. And when pushed to the edge, Emily was no longer alone. As the orchestra began to play, Michael tightened his grip on Chloe's hand and prepared to descend the stairs into the spotlight of his perfect new life. But just before his foot touched the first step, the grand doors of the ballroom swung open with a force that silenced the room. The chandeliers glittered overhead as Michael Reed and Chloe Summers prepared to make their grand descent down the staircase. Guests rose from their seats, clapping politely, the orchestra striking a triumphant note. This was the moment the couple had been waiting for, their entrance into high society as husband and wife. But before Michael could take that first step, the grand doors creaked open. Heads whipped around. The murmurs that followed weren't whispers anymore, they were sharp gasps. The bride and groom froze as a figure appeared in the doorway. Emily Carter. She didn't come alone. Flanking her were Jonathan, Daniel, and Matthew Carter, three titans of industry, whose very names could send ripples across Wall Street. They walked with quiet authority, their eyes fixed forward, their presence turning the extravagant ballroom into a stage of reckoning. Emily's gown flowed gracefully, her baby bump unmistakable, her expression steady. She wasn't there to beg nor to weep. She was there to reclaim her dignity. But to the crowd, her appearance was nothing short of scandal. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Journalists scrambled to capture the moment. "Is that Michael's wife?" Someone whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. Another voice added, "She's pregnant. My God, he left her while she was carrying his child." The buzz grew louder, a wave of judgment rising against Michael. He felt it instantly, the heat of 100 eyes burning into him. Chloe squeezed his hand tighter, but even her perfect smile began to crack. The whispers cut deeper with each passing second, every murmur peeling away the glossy facade they had tried to build. Emily stopped at the center of the room, her brothers standing protectively by her side. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone screamed the truth. Her swollen belly was undeniable evidence of Michael's betrayal. An older woman in the crowd shook her head, muttering, "A man who abandons his pregnant wife? Shameful." Another guest added coldly, "And now he parades around with a model as if loyalty means nothing." Michael tried to recover, raising his chin as though unaffected. "Emily," he said through clenched teeth, his voice low but audible, "this isn't the place." But Emily didn't flinch. Her calm gaze pierced him, steady and unyielding. Around them, the whispers grew into a storm. Investors shifted uncomfortably, calculating risks. Politicians eyed him with suspicion. Chloe's smile collapsed entirely as she realized the glittering night was slipping through her fingers. Then, in a voice that carried across the ballroom, Jonathan Carter broke the silence. "This woman is not an outsider," he declared firmly. "She is my sister. She stood by Michael Reed when he had nothing, and tonight she will not be silenced." The room erupted. Some guests gasped in admiration, others whispered in shock, and the press leaned forward eagerly, pens scratching across notepads. Michael's carefully built image shattered in real time, the betrayal laid bare for all to see. And as Emily finally lifted her head to speak, every soul in the room braced for the storm that was about to begin. The ballroom buzzed with gasps, whispers, and camera flashes. But Emily, after delivering her silent blow to Michael's illusion, felt her strength slipping away. Her breathing grew shallow, her chest heavy beneath the weight of so many eyes. Though she had walked into the mansion with unshakable dignity, the reality of her situation now pressed down on her like a storm. Her brothers noticed. Jonathan leaned closer, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Emily," he whispered softly, "you've done enough. Let us handle the rest." Emily nodded faintly, but her lips trembled. She allowed them to guide her away from the crowd and into a private lounge. The heavy doors closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the ballroom, but shutting out the whispers didn't silence the pain inside her. As soon as she sat on the velvet sofa, the tears came. Hot, unstoppable, rolling down her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled by the weight of everything she had endured. For months she had cried alone, but now her brothers were here to see her brokenness, and that made it hurt even more. Daniel knelt in front of her, his voice gentle but pained. "You shouldn't have faced him like that in your condition. You could have collapsed right there." Emily shook her head. "I had to. They all needed to see the truth. They needed to know what he did to me, to our baby." Her voice cracked on the last word, and her hand instinctively rested on her stomach. Matthew, the youngest of her brothers, clenched his fists. "He doesn't deserve you. He doesn't deserve to even breathe the same air as you. I swear, Emily, he'll regret this." But Emily, through her tears, whispered, "That's the part that hurts the most. I still loved him. I gave him everything, and when I needed him the most, he left me." The room fell silent. Her confession carried a raw truth that even her powerful brothers couldn't erase. They could protect her body, her reputation, her future, but they couldn't shield her heart from the betrayal that cut so deep. Emily leaned back, exhausted, her hands trembling. "I thought I was strong. I told myself I could face him without breaking. But when I saw his face, when I saw how proud he looked standing next to her..." She broke off, another sob escaping her throat. "It almost destroyed me." Jonathan, ever the stoic one, sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Emily. You're allowed to fall apart. That's why we're here, to catch you when you do." She clung to him, her tears soaking into his suit jacket. For a moment, she let herself be the little sister again, not the woman who had just shaken an entire ballroom. But then, a knock at the lounge door startled them all. Jonathan rose quickly, motioning for silence. The door creaked open, and the figure who entered wasn't a brother, a friend, or a journalist. It was Michael. And as Emily's tear-streaked face lifted toward the man who had abandoned her, the room froze in unbearable tension. Michael Reed stood in the doorway of the lounge, his figure framed by the golden light spilling in from the hallway. His tuxedo was immaculate, but his composure was shaken. The whispers from the ballroom had followed him like a storm cloud, and for the first time that night, his confidence cracked. Emily's brothers immediately moved to shield her. Jonathan stepped forward, his broad frame blocking Michael's path. "You've done enough damage," he said coldly. "Get out." But Michael raised his hands, his voice low, almost pleading. "Please, I just need to speak to her, just for a moment." Matthew scoffed. "After abandoning her, after humiliating her in front of the entire city, you think you have that right?" Michael's jaw tightened. "I made mistakes, but you don't understand." "Don't understand," Daniel snapped. "We understand perfectly. You traded loyalty for luxury. You traded love for lust. What more is there to say?" Emily, still trembling from her breakdown, finally lifted her head. Her tear-streaked face softened with exhaustion, but her voice was steady. "Let him speak." Her brothers hesitated, but at her nod they stepped back reluctantly, though their eyes never left Michael. He took a cautious step forward, his gaze locked on Emily. "I never wanted it to be like this," Michael began. "When I met Chloe, I thought she could give me the world I'd been chasing. I was blinded by what I thought was success. But when you walked in tonight, everything I tried to bury came rushing back." His voice cracked. "You were the one who believed in me when I had nothing, and I threw that away." Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't answer. She studied him quietly, as if weighing every syllable, every breath. Then Jonathan cut in sharply. "Words are easy, Michael, but actions speak louder." Michael turned to him, desperate. "You don't understand. Chloe, she never loved me. Tonight proved that. She's already gone. She left the ballroom the moment your sister walked in because she doesn't want a scandal. She used me and I let it happen." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Chloe, the glamorous bride, had abandoned him on their wedding night. Guests in the ballroom were no doubt already whispering about her sudden disappearance. The perfect image Michael had tried to build was crumbling faster than he could hold it together. Emily's lips parted in shock, though her heart remained guarded. For months she had suffered under the weight of his betrayal, and now here he was, stripped of the very woman he had chosen over her. Still, her brothers weren't moved. "So now you come crawling back because you're humiliated?" Matthew demanded. "You think our sister is a consolation prize?" Michael shook his head fiercely. "No, I came because seeing her tonight reminded me of the truth. Emily isn't weak. She never was. She's stronger than anyone in that ballroom, and I was a fool to leave her." Emily's breath caught, torn between anger and the faint flicker of something she didn't want to name. And just as silence thickened in the room, a journalist's voice echoed from the hallway, announcing that the press demanded a statement from Emily herself. The sound of the journalist's voice outside the lounge door echoed like a challenge. Emily sat frozen for a moment, her tears still drying on her cheeks. Her heart pounded, but instead of fear, something else began to stir inside her. A quiet fire, long buried beneath pain. She looked at Michael, who now stood defeated, his shoulders slumped, stripped of the arrogance he wore like armor. Then she turned to her brothers. Their eyes, fierce and protective, reminded her of something she had forgotten. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. Emily inhaled deeply, her hand brushing against her stomach as if drawing strength from the life within her. Slowly, she rose from the sofa. "If they want a statement," she said, her voice calm but firm, "then I'll give them one. Not as a victim, but as myself." Jonathan studied her carefully. "Emily, you don't have to expose yourself any further. We can handle the press." But Emily shook her head. "No, for too long I've let others speak for me. Tonight I'll speak for myself." Daniel reached for her arm. "You're still fragile." Her lips curved into a faint but resolute smile. "Maybe, but fragility doesn't mean weakness. Tonight they'll see the difference." Her brothers exchanged a glance, and though reluctant, they stepped aside. Jonathan signaled discreetly to their assistants, who immediately moved to control the press outside. In that moment, Emily wasn't just their little sister anymore. She was a woman ready to reclaim her voice. One of the stylists, rushing in at Daniel's request, laid out options for Emily. Her simple black gown already carried an elegance that turned heads. But now, under their careful adjustments, it became a statement. The fabric was tailored to flow perfectly around her frame, emphasizing her strength rather than hiding her pregnancy. Her hair, slightly tousled from tears, was smoothed back into soft waves. A touch of makeup brightened her features, but not to conceal, only to highlight the resilience already written on her face. She stood before a mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Gone was the woman who cried alone in the shadows. Reflected back was someone who had endured betrayal and still stood tall. A woman who carried life inside her while carrying herself with dignity. Michael watched in silence, a pang of regret twisting inside him. This was the Emily he once knew, the one who worked double shifts, who never gave up, who always believed in him. But now, she had evolved into something even greater. And for the first time, he wondered if he deserved even to stand in the same room with her. Emily adjusted her gown one last time, her hand steady on her belly. She looked at her brothers and nodded. "Let's go." The doors opened again, but this time she didn't step timidly. She walked with purpose, her heels striking against the marble floor like a drumbeat of defiance. Every head would soon turn. Every camera would soon capture her transformation. And as the crowd beyond began to stir, Emily prepared to face them. Not as the abandoned wife, but as the woman who would rewrite the story herself. The ballroom was still buzzing from the earlier shock when the doors opened again. This time it wasn't chaos or confusion, it was silence, thick and expectant, as Emily Carter re-entered the room. She didn't stumble. She didn't hide. She walked with her chin raised, her black gown flowing elegantly around her, her brothers following in quiet formation. Every eye in the room locked on her. The cameras clicked furiously, journalists pressing forward to capture every detail. Guests who had whispered pity before now stared with awe, as if they were witnessing not a scandal, but a revelation. Michael stood frozen halfway down the stairs. His carefully rehearsed smile was gone. Chloe, still clutching his arm, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. The sparkle of her diamond necklace suddenly seemed gaudy against Emily's understated grace. Emily stopped at the center of the room, directly beneath the chandeliers, facing them. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then she spoke, her voice calm yet resonant, reaching every corner of the ballroom. "You left me when I carried your child, Michael. You abandoned not just me, but the family we created. And tonight, you stand here pretending to celebrate love while the truth is written on my body for all to see." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some clutched their pearls, others murmured in disbelief. Chloe stiffened, her smile collapsing as her grip on Michael faltered. Michael's face flushed red. "Emily, stop this. You're humiliating yourself." "No," Emily answered firmly, her eyes locking onto his. "The humiliation isn't mine, it's yours. You chose to betray vows, to throw away loyalty for vanity. And now the world sees the man you truly are." Jonathan stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. "Our sister is not alone. She is a Carter. She gave her loyalty to this man when he had nothing. She worked, she sacrificed, she believed in him. And in return, he gave her betrayal." The room erupted in chatter. Investors exchanged nervous glances, politicians whispered to their aides, photographers captured every expression, every word, their flashes igniting like lightning strikes. Chloe finally snapped, pulling her arm away from Michael. "I didn't sign up for this circus," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "You told me she was out of the picture. You promised me she'd never show her face again." Gasps spread like wildfire. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines practically writing themselves. Chloe's betrayal wasn't just whispered anymore. It was shouted in front of the elite. Michael reached for her, panic flashing in his eyes, but Chloe shoved him back. "You're finished, Michael. You've embarrassed me, and I don't stay with losers." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the ballroom, leaving him standing alone. The crowd buzzed louder than ever. Some laughed at the spectacle, others shook their heads in disgust, but all eyes turned back to Emily. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lashed out, yet she had dismantled both Michael and Chloe with truth alone. And as Michael stood abandoned in the spotlight, Emily stepped closer, ready to deliver the words that would seal his fate forever. The ballroom had turned into a theater, every guest glued to the unfolding drama. Michael Reed stood abandoned in the center of the room, Chloe gone, his reputation unraveling by the second. Yet Emily Carter wasn't finished. She had carried her pain for months, and now she would let the truth speak for itself. Emily raised her chin, her voice steady. "For years, I stayed silent. I carried the weight of his broken promises alone. But tonight, I won't stay silent anymore." She turned to Jonathan, who stepped forward with a sleek black folder. He opened it and pulled out a set of documents, his tone clipped and professional. "Here are the financial records," he announced. Proof that while Emily worked double shifts at the hospital, her earnings were being funneled to pay Michael's debts. Debts he never mentioned to his investors. Debts he only survived because of her. Gas rippled through the crowd. Michael's face drained of color. Daniel, the architect, then lifted a small tablet, pressing play on a video clip. The ballroom fell silent as Michael's own voice filled the speakers. recorded years ago in their modest apartment. "I promise you, Emily," his voice echoed, raw and emotional, "I'll never leave you. No matter how rich or poor we are, you're my forever." The guests shifted uncomfortably. The words, once tender, now cut like a blade. Reporters leaned forward, capturing every second. Matthew stepped in next, his voice sharp with anger. "And yet, when she gave you the news of her pregnancy, this was your response." He pressed another button, revealing a text message projected onto a screen at the back of the ballroom. It read, "You're trying to trap me with a child. I don't want this. I want freedom." The room erupted in shock. Several guests gasped aloud. A woman muttered, "How could he say that to his wife?" Another shook his head. "And she was pregnant? Disgraceful." Michael staggered back a step, his hands trembling. "That's out of context," he stammered. "You don't understand?" But Emily cut him off. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of truth. "They understand enough. They understand that when you had nothing, I believed in you. When you were drowning in debt, I saved you. And when you had everything, you abandoned me. That is the context." The silence that followed was crushing. Every eye bore into Michael, every whisper another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Even his closest allies in the business world turned away, unwilling to be associated with him now. Emily took a step closer, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I carried your child while you carried lies. And tonight, in front of all these people, I will no longer let you define me. I am not the abandoned wife. I am not the weak woman you thought I was. I am Emily Carter. And I will not be silenced." The crowd erupted into applause, some rising to their feet. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, capturing the exact moment Emily transformed from victim into victor. And as Michael's knees buckled under the weight of exposure, he dropped to the floor, leaving everyone stunned by what he was about to do next. The applause that followed Emily's declaration still echoed through the ballroom when Michael's knees finally buckled. He sank to the marble floor, the man who once strutted with arrogance, now trembling in the harsh glow of chandeliers. The tuxedo he had chosen to symbolize power only made his fall appear more pathetic, like a costume stripped of its illusion. The room fell silent. Guests leaned forward, some in disbelief, others savoring the sight of his humiliation. Journalists scribbled furiously, recording the downfall of a man who had traded loyalty for ambition and now stood with nothing. Michael lifted his face, pale and sweaty, his eyes locking onto Emily. "Please," he rasped, his voice breaking in a way no one in the room had ever heard. "Emily, I'm sorry. I was blind. I was stupid. I didn't see what I had until I lost it." Emily didn't move. She stood tall, her brothers flanking her like guardians, her expression calm but unreadable. Michael crawled forward a step, ignoring the gasps around him. "You saved me when I was nothing. You built me up when the world laughed at me. And how did I repay you? By abandoning you when you needed me most. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that, but I beg for it anyway." Chloe's absence loomed like a shadow. Only hours ago he thought she was his prize, the proof of his success, but now she was gone, fleeing the moment his shine dulled. The guests saw it too, how quickly the woman he chose over his wife had vanished, leaving him broken. Jonathan's voice thundered across the room. "You think words erase betrayal? You think falling to your knees redeems you?" Michael turned to him, tears streaking his face. "No, I know it doesn't. But I'm not begging you. I'm begging her." His gaze returned to Emily, his voice cracking with desperation. "I still love you. I never stopped. I was too proud, too greedy, too blind to admit it. Please, Emily. Please give me a chance to make it right." The crowd stirred. Some whispered that he was pathetic. Others murmured that perhaps love still lingered. But all eyes returned to Emily, waiting to see if her heart would harden or soften in the face of his collapse. Emily's breath caught. The part of her that had once loved him deeply, that had dreamed of raising a family together, flickered faintly. But so did the memory of nights alone, the sting of betrayal, the cruel words he had sent when she told him she was pregnant. Her hand tightened around her gown, her eyes glassy but sharp. "You broke me, Michael," she said softly, her words carrying across the hushed ballroom. "You broke what we had. Do you even understand the pain you caused?" Michael's shoulders shook. "I do, and if it takes the rest of my life to prove it, I'll carry that burden. Just don't shut me out forever." And as the weight of his words filled the room, Emily felt her knees weaken, torn between the ashes of betrayal and the fragile spark of hope that refused to die. The ballroom was silent, so silent that even the orchestra had stopped playing. Every pair of eyes followed Emily as she stood, her breath uneven, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. Before her knelt Michael Reed, the man who had once been her everything and then her greatest source of pain. His tuxedo now looked like chains around him. His pride shattered on the marble floor. Emily's mind spun. Images flashed before her eyes, Michael laughing with her in their tiny apartment, eating noodles on the floor because they couldn't afford a table. Michael holding her hand when he promised he would never leave her, even if he had nothing. Michael's voice full of dreams, vowing they would build a life together. Then the darker memories crashed in. His cold stare when she told him she was pregnant, his cruel words accusing her of trapping him. The wedding announcement splashed across magazines while she sat alone, weeping into her pillow. And Chloe's smug smile, flaunting what had once belonged to her. Her heart twisted. She had loved Michael with everything she had, and he had shattered that love into pieces. Could those pieces ever be put back together? Jonathan stepped closer, his voice firm but protective. Emily, don't let his words sway you. Men like him don't change overnight. He doesn't deserve your forgiveness. Daniel added, his tone softer but still wary. You've carried the pain too long, little sister. Don't let him drag you back into it. You have us. You don't need him. Matthew clenched his jaw. If you even think about giving him another chance, make him prove it. Words are worthless. Emily turned her gaze back to Michael. He was trembling, tears streaking down his face. This wasn't the confident man who had left her for glamour. This was someone stripped bare, raw with regret. And yet the memory of betrayal cut so deeply that she feared it would scar forever. She spoke, her voice trembling but clear. Do you know what it felt like to sit alone in a hospital bed, terrified for my child, knowing the man I love chose another woman over us? Do you know how it feels to be abandoned when you're at your weakest? That pain doesn't just vanish. Michael bowed his head. I know I can never erase it, but I can spend every day trying to heal it. I will be there, for you, for our child, if you let me. Please, Emily, give me that chance. The guests leaned forward, breathless. Some shook their heads, convinced she would never forgive. Others clasped their hands, silently rooting for reconciliation. The tension was unbearable. Emily's lips trembled as she whispered, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Michael reached out, his hands shaking. Then let me earn it. Let me fight for it. Don't end us here. And as Emily's eyes filled with tears, she realized that the next words she spoke would change not just her life, but the life of her unborn child forever. The air in the ballroom grew heavier, as though the walls themselves were listening. Emily's tears shimmered in the golden light, her heart torn between scars of betrayal and the faint spark of hope. Before she could answer Michael's plea, Jonathan stepped forward, his presence towering, his voice cutting through the silence. No, Jonathan said firmly, his eyes fixed on Michael. You don't get to ask for forgiveness so easily. You've already proven what your words are worth. Nothing. If you want my sister to even consider letting you near her again, you'll prove it. Tonight. Murmurs rose through the crowd. Guests leaned in, eager to see what test the Carter brothers would demand of the fallen millionaire. Michael lifted his head, desperation burning in his eyes. Anything, he said hoarsely. Tell me what I must do. Daniel crossed his arms, his voice sharp with controlled anger. You want redemption? Then strip yourself of what you value most, your pride and your reputation. Stand before this crowd, the same crowd you lied to, and confess everything. No excuses. No hiding. Lay your sins bare. Michael's face paled. His reputation had been his lifeline, the very image he had built his fortune upon. To destroy it with his own words was unthinkable. But when he glanced at Emily, saw the pain etched on her face, he swallowed hard. If that's what it takes, he whispered, then I'll do it. Matthew stepped forward next, his tone sharper still. And one more thing. Chloe may have walked out, but we all know you tried to build a future with her. End it publicly, right here, right now. Show this room and the world that you choose Emily, not as an afterthought, but as the only woman you will stand by. Michael's stomach twisted. To admit it all in front of this crowd, his investors, his so-called friends, the media, was like setting fire to everything he had worked for. But then he looked again at Emily, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her eyes filled with both strength and sorrow. Slowly, he rose from his knees. His legs trembled, but his voice, though shaky, carried across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his throat dry, "you've all seen the man I pretended to be tonight. The successful husband, the loyal partner, but the truth is far uglier. I am a liar. I abandoned my wife Emily when she carried my child. I chose vanity, wealth, and appearances over love, honor, and loyalty. And in doing so, I became a man I barely recognize." Gasps echoed, but Michael pressed on. "Chloe Summers did not love me. She loved the status I could give her, and I let myself believe that was enough. But it wasn't, it will never be. The only woman who ever truly loved me is the one I betrayed. And if she can find it in her heart to let me try again, I will spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of her." His voice cracked on the last words, but his gaze never left Emily's. The room erupted in whispers, some incredulous, others moved by the rawness of his confession. And as the silence returned, all eyes turned to Emily, waiting to see if his sacrifice was enough to touch the heart he had broken. The ballroom was still vibrating with the echoes of Michael's confession. His words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Guests leaned forward in anticipation, every eye trained on Emily. For the first time, the power was entirely hers. Emily's chest rose and fell as she fought to steady her breathing. Her heart pounded against her ribs, torn in two directions. One part of her screamed to turn away, to never forget the betrayal that had almost destroyed her. The other whispered faintly, reminding her of the man she had once loved, the dreams they had once shared. Her brothers stood close, their presence solid, a wall of strength around her. Jonathan's jaw was tight with controlled rage. Daniel's eyes softened with worry. Matthew's hands curled into fists, itching to pull her away from Michael and end this nightmare once and for all. But Emily wasn't just their little sister anymore. She wasn't the abandoned wife hiding in shadows. She was a mother, a woman carrying new life inside her, a woman who had endured the deepest wounds and still stood tall. And now, she had to decide what kind of future she wanted for herself and her child. Her mind replayed the hospital room, cold, sterile, empty, where she had clutched her belly, praying she wouldn't lose her baby while Michael laughed at parties with Chloe. She remembered the loneliness, the sharp ache of rejection, the humiliation of seeing their wedding announcement on glossy magazine covers. That pain had cut so deep she thought she might never heal. And yet, she also remembered the Michael she once knew. The man who had sat with her through nights of exhaustion, who had whispered dreams of building a life together. The man who had held her when she cried after long hospital shifts, who had promised she was his forever. Could that man still exist somewhere inside the broken figure kneeling before her? Emily's throat tightened as tears burned her eyes. She wanted to scream, to release the anger and grief that had consumed her for months. But she also wanted to believe in redemption, to believe that people could change if they truly wanted to. Jonathan leaned closer, his voice low. "Don't let him fool you again. He confessed because he was cornered, not because he's changed." Daniel added softly, "Think about your child. Do you want them to grow up with a father like him?" Matthew shook his head. "He'll never deserve you, Emily. Don't let his tears sway you." Emily listened, her heart aching with the weight of their words. She knew they wanted to protect her, but this wasn't their choice to make. It was hers. Her eyes returned to Michael. He was still on his knees, broken, desperate, stripped of everything he once valued. But in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse, the kind that couldn't be faked under the glare of chandeliers and cameras. Emily pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I forgive you, Michael, how will I ever know you won't break me again?" And as the question hung in the air, Michael slowly lifted his head, ready to answer with the one truth that could either save him or end everything forever. Michael lifted his head slowly, his face streaked with tears, his voice trembling but raw with sincerity. The ballroom was silent, every guest frozen in anticipation of his next words. Emily's question, "How will I ever know you won't break me again?" hung in the air like a blade, sharp and demanding an answer. Michael drew a shaky breath. Because I've already lost everything once, and I would rather lose my fortune, my pride, my name, everything, than lose you again. The words echoed across the room, silencing even the murmurs of the press. He rose slightly, though still on bent knees, his hands open in surrender. Emily, I spent years building walls of money and status, thinking they made me strong, but none of it mattered when you walked away. Tonight showed me the truth. Without you, I am nothing but an empty man in a suit. Emily's lips trembled, but she remained quiet. Her brothers watched closely, suspicion etched into their faces. Michael turned toward them, his voice firmer. You think I'm only saying this because I was caught. But you don't know the nights I lay awake in that mansion, haunted by her absence. You don't know how every laugh, every toast, every smile with Chloe tasted bitter because it wasn't Emily beside me. I betrayed the only woman who ever loved me for who I was, not what I had. And I will never forgive myself for it. He looked back at Emily, his voice breaking. If you let me back into your life, I swear before God, before this crowd, before our child, that I will be different. I will not chase wealth at the cost of love. I will not let ambition blind me again. I will put you and our child above everything else, above business, above pride, above myself. That is my pledge. The guests shifted in their seats, some dabbing at their eyes, others shaking their heads skeptically. The rawness of his words stirred conflicting emotions. Michael pressed his palm to the marble floor as though swearing an oath. I will prove it with action. Take my fortune if you must. Take my company, my home, my name. I'll give it all up tonight if that's what it takes. Just don't take away the chance to be a father, to be a husband worthy of you. The weight of his vow settled over the room. Even Jonathan, though still stern, blinked in surprise at the depth of Michael's desperation. Daniel glanced at Emily, as if to gauge her reaction. Matthew crossed his arms, muttering under his breath, words, still just words. Emily's chest rose and fell. Her eyes shimmering with tears, she tried to hold back. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the hope that people could change. But her heart still ached with fear of betrayal. Michael reached out a trembling hand toward her, his voice a whisper now. Please, Emily, don't let this be the end of us. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you once believed I was. And as the crowd leaned in, waiting for Emily's answer, she felt the weight of an impossible choice pressing harder than ever before. The room was still heavy with Michael's pledge when a sudden ripple of movement swept through the crowd. Emily pressed her hand to her stomach, her face tightening as a sharp pain shot through her body. Her knees buckled slightly, and she gasped, clutching the edge of the nearest chair for balance. Emily! Jonathan shouted, immediately rushing to her side. Daniel and Matthew followed, panic flashing in their eyes. Guests rose from their seats, alarm spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. Reporters dropped their pens, cameras swinging as they tried to capture the unfolding moment. The orchestra stopped playing entirely, the air filled only with the sound of Emily's strained breathing. She shook her head, whispering, "It's the baby." Her voice trembled with both fear and pain. Michael's heart lurched. He didn't hesitate. Pushing past her brothers, he knelt at her side, his hands steadying her trembling frame. "Emily, I'm here," he said firmly, his voice shaking but resolute. "You're not alone, not anymore." Jonathan's eyes burned with fury. "Stay away from her. You've caused enough damage." But Emily clung to Michael's arm, her grip tight, desperate. "Let him help." Her words were faint, but they silenced her brothers instantly. Michael slipped one arm beneath her legs and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he carried her toward the doors. "Move!" He barked at the guests in his path, his voice filled with urgency. Outside, the limousine was already waiting, but Michael shook his head. "Too slow. She needs a hospital now." He spotted a security vehicle nearby and ordered the driver to open the doors. Jonathan, Daniel, and Matthew piled in behind them, their expressions grim but unwilling to leave their sister in Michael's hands alone. The ride was tense, every second stretching like eternity. Emily lay in Michael's arms, her breathing shallow. He stroked her hair, whispering, "Hold on, Emily. Please, just hold on. I swear, I won't let anything happen to you or our baby." At the hospital, doctors rushed them into the emergency ward. Michael refused to let go of her hand until the nurses insisted. He stood in the hallway, trembling, his heart pounding harder than it ever had during any business deal or negotiation. Money, reputation, pride, none of it mattered. All that mattered was behind those double doors fighting for life. Jonathan paced, his anger simmering. "If anything happens to her," he growled, glaring at Michael. Michael nodded, his voice hoarse. "Blame me, hate me, I deserve it. But I'm not leaving her side again, not tonight, not ever." Time crawled. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of medical equipment echoed faintly from inside the room, every beep and murmur twisting Michael's gut tighter. Finally, the doors swung open. The doctor stepped out, his expression unreadable, holding a chart. And as the doctor's eyes scanned the group, the room froze, waiting for the words that would decide Emily and her baby's fate. The doctor's gaze moved from one face to another, the tension in the hallway unbearable. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice sharp with urgency. "How is she? How's my sister?" The doctor sighed, lowering his clipboard. "She's stable, but the pregnancy is under stress. The baby's heartbeat was erratic for several minutes. We managed to stabilize both mother and child, but she needs rest, low stress, and close monitoring." Relief swept through the group, but it was fragile, like thin ice over deep water. Daniel rubbed his forehead, whispering, "Thank God." Matthew exhaled heavily, fists unclenching. But then the doctor continued, his tone firm. "She should not have been exposed to emotional strain of this magnitude. Another episode like tonight could put her and the baby at serious risk. If you care about her, you must protect her from further turmoil." The brothers exchanged dark glances, their anger simmering. Jonathan turned his glare on Michael. "You heard him. You're the turmoil. You're the reason she's in that room. If you truly care, you'll walk away and never come back." Michael's heart clenched. He wanted to argue, to scream that he had changed, but the doctor's words echoed in his mind. Protect her from turmoil. Could he be that protection now? Or was he still the chaos she needed to escape? He spoke softly, his voice raw. "I'm not leaving. I'll sit outside her door every night if I have to. I won't abandon her again, not when she needs me most." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You say that now. But what about tomorrow? Next week? When temptation knocks again? Words don't erase betrayal." Michael swallowed hard. "Then let me prove it. Don't believe me now. Watch me. Test me. Give me the chance to show you I'm not the same man." The hallway went quiet, his words hanging heavy. The brothers wanted to dismiss him, to throw him out of the hospital, but there was something different in his tone. Gone was the arrogance, the pride. What remained was desperation rooted not in reputation, but in love. The door creaked open again, and a nurse peeked out. "She's awake. She's asking for Michael." The brothers stiffened. Shock rippled through them, but they didn't argue with the nurse. Jonathan sighed, his voice low but stern. "If she wants you, then though. But know this, if you hurt her again, if you bring her one more ounce of pain, I swear we'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Michael nodded solemnly, his chest tight with both fear and resolve. "You have my word." He stepped into the dimly lit hospital room. Emily lay on the bed, pale but awake, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. When her eyes met his, they glistened with both exhaustion and uncertainty. Michael moved closer, his voice trembling. "Emily, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And as she looked at him through tears, Emily whispered the one question that would determine everything. "Do you really love me, or do you just love the idea of redemption?" The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors beeping steadily beside Emily's bed. Her face was pale, her eyes weary but sharp, piercing through the silence. Her words lingered between them. "Do you really love me, or do you just love the idea of redemption?" Michael's chest tightened. This was the question he had feared most. The one that stripped away every excuse, every carefully rehearsed line. He stepped closer, lowering himself to his knees beside her bed. "I don't love redemption, Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't love the idea of being forgiven because it makes me look good. I love you. I love the woman who held me up when I was drowning in debt. I love the woman who worked nights at the hospital and still came home to cheer me on when everyone else told me to quit. I love the woman who laughed with me over cheap noodles in a tiny apartment and still looked at me like I was the richest man in the world." Emily's eyes glistened, her lips trembling, but she stayed silent, listening. Michael pressed a hand to his chest, his words spilling faster, rawer. I chased after Chloe, after money, after status, because I thought that was love. That if people admired me, I would finally be worth something. But standing there tonight, watching you walk into that ballroom with your brothers, I realized the truth. You were the treasure all along, and I threw it away. His voice cracked. He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. If you never forgive me, I'll understand. If you never let me back into your life, I'll accept it. But please believe me when I say this. I will never stop loving you. Not because I want to be redeemed, but because my love for you is the only part of me that was ever real. A tear slid down Emily's cheek. She wanted to believe him, but her heart was still bruised. Love isn't enough, Michael, she whispered. You loved me once, and you still betrayed me. How can I trust you now? Michael's eyes filled with tears. You can't, at least not yet. I know I don't deserve your trust today. That's why I'll earn it tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. I'll show up. I'll be there for you and for our child. Not because it's easy, not because it redeems me, but because I can't imagine my life without you. You're not my redemption. You're my reason. The words struck something deep inside Emily. For months she had lived with anger, betrayal, and pain. But now, hearing him speak without defense or pride, she saw the man she once fell in love with, not perfect but human, broken, desperate to change. Her brother's warnings still rang in her ears, but her heart ached with the possibility of healing. Could she risk opening that door again? And as Emily's tears fell silently, she whispered, "Then prove it, Michael. Prove it not with words, but with your life." Days passed after the night of the wedding scandal, and the story spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed betrayal, redemption, and the shocking reappearance of Emily Carter. Paparazzi camped outside the hospital, hungry for photos. Investors pulled out of Michael's ventures, and his carefully crafted empire teetered on collapse. But for once, he didn't care about any of it. All that mattered was Emily. Every morning, Michael arrived at the hospital before sunrise. He brought breakfast. Not lavish meals, but simple foods Emily had once loved, the kind they used to share in their tiny apartment. He sat by her bed, reading aloud from her favorite books, or just holding her hand when the silence grew too heavy. He didn't push for forgiveness. He didn't demand trust. He simply showed up, day after day, as steady as the heartbeat of their unborn child. Emily watched him cautiously at first, her guard high, her pain still raw. But she couldn't ignore the small ways he had changed. The man who once measured success in money now measured it in moments. Quiet evenings spent by her side, whispered prayers for their baby's health, long hours waiting outside every doctor's appointment. Her brothers remained skeptical. Jonathan confronted him one evening in the hospital hallway. "You think sitting by her bed erases what you did? You think showing up for a week makes you a changed man?" Michael met his glare without flinching. "No, I know it doesn't. That's why I'll keep showing up, for a week, a month, a lifetime. However long it takes. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to watch me." Daniel added, "If you ever falter, if you ever even think about hurting her again, you'll answer to us." Michael nodded firmly. "I understand." Inside the room, Emily listened through the slightly open door. A part of her heart softened at Michael's words, though doubt still lingered. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of being shattered again loomed like a shadow. One afternoon, when a nurse wheeled in equipment for another scan, Michael insisted on helping. He held Emily's hand as the sound of their baby's heartbeat filled the room. Tears streamed down his face, raw and unguarded. "That's our child," he whispered. "That's our miracle. And I will protect you both, with everything I have left." Emily's throat tightened. For the first time in months, she didn't see arrogance or pride in his eyes. She saw the man she had fallen in love with, the man who once dreamed of building a family with her. Her heart wavered. The pain hadn't vanished, but something new stirred in its place, the possibility of healing. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to accept his presence, no longer pushing him away. She didn't declare forgiveness, but she allowed him into her world, little by little. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but a foundation had begun to form. And just as Emily started to believe Michael might truly have changed, life handed them one final test that would either cement their reunion or tear them apart forever. The final test came on a stormy night weeks later. Emily went into labor earlier than expected, and chaos filled the hospital corridors. Nurses rushed, doctors barked orders, and Emily's cries echoed down the hall. Her brothers stood outside the delivery room, pacing with dread, their powerful influence useless against the raw force of life and death. Inside, Michael refused to leave Emily's side. He held her hand tightly, whispering encouragement through every contraction, wiping sweat from her brow, praying silently between each of her gasps. This wasn't the man who once feared responsibility. This was a man facing it head-on, unflinching. Emily squeezed his hand so hard her nails dug into his skin, but he didn't flinch. "Breathe with me," he whispered. "You're not alone, Emily. Not anymore. I'm here. Always." Hours later, the cries of a newborn filled the room. A nurse gently placed a tiny, swaddled baby in Emily's arms. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stared at the miracle she had carried through months of heartbreak. The baby's tiny fingers curled around her own, fragile yet powerful enough to bind her heart forever. Michael leaned close, his face wet with tears. "She's perfect," he whispered, "just like her mother." Emily looked at him, exhausted but radiant. For the first time in a long time, she saw no shadows of arrogance, no traces of vanity, only love, raw and unguarded. Her brothers entered the room cautiously. Jonathan's stern expression softened when he saw Emily holding the baby. Daniel smiled faintly, and even Matthew's usual sharp edge dulled. They surrounded her, protectors as always, but for the first time, they saw Michael differently. He stood beside Emily, not in front of her. He wasn't trying to claim credit or power. He was simply there, devoted and steady. Jonathan studied him for a long moment, then finally spoke. "You stayed? You didn't run. You've proven more in these weeks than words ever could." Michael met his gaze, his voice steady. "I'll keep proving it, for the rest of my life." Emily looked between them, her heart swelling with relief. For months, she had carried nothing but pain, but now she carried hope. She turned to Michael, her voice soft but firm. "You broke me once, but you've also fought to put me back together. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight I choose to believe in us again." Michael's lips trembled as he pressed a kiss to her hand. "Thank you. I'll never let you regret it." The brothers exchanged glances, then nodded silently. They would still watch him closely, but for now they stepped back. Emily wasn't alone. She had their protection, her child's love, and now perhaps her husband's redemption. Weeks later, Emily stepped out of the hospital, her baby cradled in her arms, Michael at her side, and her brothers walking proudly beside them. Paparazzi cameras flashed wildly, but this time Emily didn't feel exposed. She felt powerful. Her voice carried clearly as she addressed the reporters. "This is my family, and no woman should ever feel weak when she carries love, dignity, and the strength to rise again." The crowd erupted in applause, the flashes of cameras unable to outshine the glow of her triumph. Emily smiled through tears, holding her child close as Michael whispered, "This is our new beginning." And with that, Emily's story ended not in betrayal, but in love restored, a family reborn, and a future stronger than the past. So my wonderful friends, the story is closed, but maybe you're still here listening, feeling something stirring in your heart. If you stayed with Emily and Michael until the very end, it means something in their journey touched you. Maybe the pain of betrayal, maybe the hope of forgiveness. Life often gives us storms, and like the Stoics remind us, we cannot control what happens, only how we respond. Emily chose dignity. Michael chose change, and together they chose to heal. Let this remind us that true strength is not in wealth or pride, but in love, loyalty, and resilience. If their story reached you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Because just like Emily's journey, we're all writing our own chapters of falling, rising, and choosing again. Stronger, wiser, braver.